Have you ever considered a broadcast media ministry? A broadcast television ministry. You know, today we live in the world of YouTube. We live in the world of digital online media. We live in the world of streaming. But the truth is there's still a place for traditional television ministry. If you're a pastor, a ministry leader, or you know someone who's thinking about a traditional television program, I would encourage you to send this link to them, or I'd encourage you to watch this episode, because that's what this is about. This is not for people doing short videos on YouTube or social media videos. This is for people that really feel called to do television. There's a lot of myths out there about television. There's a lot of people that think a broadcast television ministry is a thing of the past. Well, I'm here to tell you it's not. And there's a place for it. There's a space for it. And if you have the right understanding of how to do it and what you need to do, you could launch a successful broadcast television ministry even in today's world. So I'm going to talk about the 10 commandments of launching a media ministry. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Phil Cooke, and welcome to this podcast episode. It's one of the ones that really hits home with me because this is something that's happened to me for so many years when people come to me for advice, particularly about starting a media ministry. By the way, this is the Phil Cooke podcast. I'd encourage you to check it out, subscribe, go on YouTube, go on iTunes. This is the kind of information that if you're a professional communicator, you need to hear. And today's episode is particularly important for people who want to start a media ministry. Now, that may be a pastor, it may be a communication professional, maybe your media ministry isn't necessarily sermon-based like so many churches do, but whatever purpose, whatever style, whatever method, these are things I want you to think about. Because over the years, and trust me, we've been involved in so many media outreaches and media ministries. In fact, a lot of people will come and ask me, Phil, what exactly do you do for a living? Certainly, we produce an enormous number of programs. We produce a lot of content. Our team just got back, as I'm recording this podcast, our team just got back from filming in India, China, Mongolia, Korea, and Japan, working on a documentary that we're doing on the rise of Christianity in that part of the world. But so we do plenty of production, but we also do a lot of coaching, a lot of consulting, working with pastors and leaders of nonprofit organizations and churches, helping them understand how to use media more effectively. So one of the questions I get a lot is, should I start a media ministry, like a regular broadcast television show? Or should I start streaming? Should I start being on YouTube? I wrote down the most common questions I get are what equipment I should use. What should I lease it or purchase it? Should I videotape my Sunday service, or should I do it at a local studio? What about buying used equipment? Almost every question I get is about equipment, when to me, equipment is the least important decision you will make. And I'll tell you why in a minute. Stay tuned, because you're going to want to listen to this all the way through. If you're interested in launching a media ministry, or you know someone who is, maybe you have a pastor or a friend who is really considering this, or you think they're doing it wrong. If you think they're not as effective as they could be, you should get them this podcast, because it's going to be filled with important information that will help. So I want to talk about what I call the 10 commandments of television. Really, these are the 10 commandments of ministry television. If you're a Christian and by the way, let me just say, Christian television is still very, very viable. Certainly the world has changed. I mean, our group, Cooke Media Group, our company, we advise on streaming. We advise we coach people through YouTube videos, short films, things like that. Social media is more important than ever. Your website really matters. But that doesn't mean broadcast television has gone away. Broadcast television is still a vital, vital tool in reaching millions and millions of people out there. So before you just blow it off, these are important things to think about, because I'll tell you, it's a huge audience that we're not reaching in the way we used to. So these are just 10 things that I think are important, the 10 commandments of launching a media ministry. And before you step out, here's the things I want you to think about. Number one, understand the power of telling a story. You know what? Forget worried about what kind of camera you're going to get. Forget the kind of, do I buy it from a used guy? Do I buy it new? Forget those questions. Start with, how do I tell a compelling story? We all know that stories are the most powerful tool out there. I mean, since the days of the earliest Hebrew storytellers sitting around a campfire in the Middle East, telling stories has captured the imagination of millions and millions of people in generation after generation after generation. So understand first the techniques for how to tell a story. I mean, the truth is you're going to get up in the pulpit every week and preach about, a very simple story about how God sacrificed his life for people who didn't deserve it, to win them back, to win a relationship back to him. And that's a remarkably simple but powerful story. And so being able to tell that in a compelling way is so important. And trust me, we live in a digital age. And today, people are more visual than ever. They're more story-driven than ever. I meet young people all the time that tell me, Phil, I don't read books anymore. I'm just watching videos, or I'm watching television, or I'm watching movies or short films. We live in a visual generation, so understanding how to tell that story in that way is so important. One of my favorite filmmakers of all time is Ingmar Bergman, Swedish filmmaker. He said, facts go straight to the head, stories go straight to the heart. We need to understand that as presenters, whether you're a preacher or a speaker or you're presenting to your team, understand the power of telling a good story. There's a lot of tools and resources out there, but until you really understand how to really tell a compelling, powerful story, you're not going to get far as a communicator. I don't care what kind of camera you have, you're not going to impact people. The second commandment is don't feel like your Christian program has to be explicit. Let me explain what that means. I mean, I grew up in an era where if people were going to invest in television, if they were going to create a program, man, they felt like it had to preach the gospel, it had to get people saved, healed, delivered, whatever, all in one big swoop. That doesn't work. You don't have to be explicit. You don't have to tell the whole story. I believe, and this is just my personal opinion after doing this for decades, that the purpose of media is to change the way people think. Now, some people may accept Christ as a result of your program. They may have a dramatic encounter with God as a result of your program, but most people won't. I saw a statistic a long time ago that indicated that when the movie The Passion of the Christ came out, only one incredibly infinitesimal fraction of people that saw the movie actually made a decision for God. And that's about as explicit a movie as you'll ever find. And so if such a small number of people actually accepted Christ after watching that movie, chances are it's going to be really hard to get people to do that after watching your program. So don't go in assuming you're going to get thousands of calls of people who have been saved because of your show. Focus more on helping people change the way they think. When I did my PhD, when I did my doctoral dissertation, I studied at the Billy Graham Institute, where they had done research that indicates people accept Christ in something like 7 clear steps. Nobody just wakes up one morning and decides to be a Christian. They go through a series of steps making that decision. This is a big life-changing decision. And you never know where people are on that continuum, on that journey. So when you make a program, understand you could be encountering people who are not even remotely close to that, but if you could start piquing their interest and changing their attitude, you can be successful. So the third commandment is be in touch with current culture. I'm not so worried about this today like I was maybe 10, 20 years ago. Remember, those of you who have been around a while, in the early days of Christian television, it was just pathetic. I mean, the way people dressed, the way people wore their hair, the way people designed their sets, it was embarrassing because they weren't in touch with current culture. And today, I almost worry that this younger generation of pastors and leaders are almost over the top when it comes to being in touch with culture. They're wearing expensive tennis shoes. They're being overly hip. I'm not going to argue with their personal style. What the choices they make is theirs. But I do think we need to think about the culture. We need to understand how to speak their language. Whatever that is, we need to engage the culture. And that is a design issue. That's a wardrobe issue. It's a style of shooting issue. I remember so many people when handheld camera techniques, shaky cam techniques came on the scene. People didn't really understand the purpose and why it was and why people were doing it. So very often Christians would just go shoot something and start shaking the camera, but not having any idea of what that technique was really about. We need to study these things. We need to understand if we're going to use video, television, film as a tool, we need to understand why those tools work. I'll tell you, I'm a big believer that if you don't understand the culture, you're going to fail. I mean, Acts 17, Paul on Mars Hill, he wasn't using scripture to defend his position. He was using their own philosophers against them, which means he understood their writers. He understood their philosophers. He had done his homework. He understood the culture he was dealing in, and that's one of the reasons Paul has been so successful. So number 4, before you launch a media ministry, make sure your financing is in place. Here's the thing. You're going to go on in a world today that has probably, my DirecTV in my home has about 500 channels. You're going to go on in a streaming world that has billions of channels. So the thing is, you don't have the budget to do the kind of promotion it takes to get on the radar. So it could take up to 2 years before people find your show. Certainly there's social media tools, there's online tools we can use to help make people aware of your program, particularly if it's a local show and you're in a local market. But the fact is, man, you just don't have the budget to drive millions and millions of people to watch your show, and it will take time for them to find your program. So you need to have the financing in place to get you at least, I really recommend 2 years of being on the air before you start getting any response from viewers at all. And remember, most Christian programming is viewer sponsored. It's what we call direct response programming, much like infomercials. Doesn't mean we can't experiment with commercials, and I'd encourage you to do that. I know a lot of ministries that have experimented with commercials, but it's difficult finding a product that will put up the money for a show that's not reaching a massive, massive audience. So chances are you're going to have to try to encourage people to donate and to do it, whether your audience donates or you find high donors from other places or your church supports it. A lot of major, large churches today, they've taken it upon themselves to fund their media outreach, which is great. Whatever way you've chosen, get the financing in place, because there's nothing worse or more embarrassing than being on for 2 months and then having to stop because you just didn't have the funding in place. It will take a lot longer than that for the audience to find you. I think that's important. Number 5, commandment number 5 is always be open to change. Let me tell you something. The only thing that's permanent out there is change. The unexpected is often the most exciting answer. So the question is, what works in your church may not necessarily work on television. What works in your nonprofit, even if you're doing a direct response programming, raising funding or donor development for a great humanitarian cause, what you're doing in Ethiopia, what you're doing in Haiti, what you're doing in Moldova or some other place may not be what will work on television. Just understand and be open to change. Understand that things, the culture changes. We get hung up on the fact that the Word of God never changes. Well, trust me, everything else does. People change, trends change, styles change. Certainly television styles change, graphic styles are changing. And yet I know plenty of Christian programs that are still locked in the way we produced shows 20, 30 years ago. So always be open to change. Commandment number 6, before you launch a ministry, a media ministry, have a clear focus. In other words, go in knowing what you want to accomplish. If the purpose of your program is to bring people to Christ, focus on that. The purpose of your show is to do, alert people of a humanitarian crisis somewhere, focus on that. If your show is about reaching the homeless, focus on that. Whatever it is, have a definitive focus on your program. If you've read my book, Unique, Telling Your Story in the Age of Brands and Social Media, and by the way, I would encourage you to do that. I would encourage you to check the book out because this will help you do that very thing. All the techniques I talk about here are in the book, and they will help you understand the mindset you need to be into and how to have that kind of niche focus to make your program successful. If you're trying to reach everybody, you'll fail. I've done posts before on the fact that Jesus didn't reach everybody. Remember, there were villages that Jesus went into where people didn't respond. And in fact, he told the disciples, if you go into a village and people don't hear you out, if they're not interested, just shake the dust off your feet and move on. So stop thinking you can reach everybody and start focusing on the audience that you really can reach. It'll make a huge difference. Commandment number 7, don't forget creativity. In most cases, I don't have to really talk about that much for today's audiences and today's listeners, but the truth is creativity really matters. It's in many ways, it's the currency of this generation. I love the fact that there was an advertising executive once said, creativity is like shaving. If you don't do it every day, you're a bum. I agree. We have to be creative in everything we do, every program we produce. How can we make it more unique? How can we make it different, more effective? Those kind of things are so incredibly important. Number 8, commandment number 8, don't let your vision stop at preaching. Now, here's the thing about that. The truth is, preaching is the cheapest thing you probably can do because here, let's face it, you're up in the pulpit every week anyway. You're preaching the message. You've got an audience. You're probably filming it, videotaping it, either for teaching tools or for live streaming or for social media clips. So you already got the components necessary to create a TV show. So obviously, I like to explore that. I mean, I don't mind preaching television shows. There's a place for that. I mean, on my cable TV, I've got home remodeling channels. I've got sports channels. I've got gay channels, lifestyle channels, all kind of channels. So I don't mind a channel for preaching. I don't mind that at all. I don't think that should be all we do, but I don't mind that. So understand that's okay, but don't let that limit you. Think of what else you could do. I have so many pastors that I know that they're great pastors, they're great preachers. However, they're amazing on the street. Take them out on the street to interview people. Take them out on the street to go into urban areas, talk in those kind of environments. Those are fantastic. Always think about how you could express this message in a more creative way than just preaching. So preaching isn't bad, but it's not the end of what Christian media could be. There's so many more possibilities out there. What I would say about that too is, don't forget other incredible ideas for things like holidays, holiday programming, documentary programming, children's programming, special event programming. I mean, think about it. There's so many churches in America that spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on their Christmas presentation, and yet never once think about, could we videotape that in a really powerful way and use that in a local television program to invite people to our church for Christmas? There's a lot of possibilities out there that we're not taking advantage of. So I'd encourage you to think about other things you could do. Maybe when you take a tour of the Holy Land, you do a documentary on that, or some outreach that your church or your ministry organization does. It doesn't have to be pulpit stuff all the time. You can vary that up and do some interesting things. Commandment number 9, don't forget outside advice. One of the things that we've discovered is, because we've been involved in so many outreaches, so many media launches with churches and ministry organizations, that people come to us regularly asking for advice on how to launch a television ministry. And I tell you, that outside advice is key, because chances are your team, your in-house team who's never done a television program before, or who have very limited experience doing a television program, they're not going to know all the ins and outs of how to make a compelling show. There's so many things like the structure of your show, how the audience is going to respond or not, where you want to put promo things, where you want to talk about inviting people to your church. Do you want to get your books out there? Do you want to have people download your messages? All those things need to be thought out when you create a show, and you need outside advice to help you do that. The world is changing pretty quickly, and the styles of shows being shot are changing. So don't hesitate. Call us, Cooke Media Group. Our team is ready to help, if necessary, to help you create the kind of program you want to create. The 10th commandment is, don't underestimate the importance of quality. And I will say this, I think we do live in an age where a lot of stuff is being shot on mobile devices. A lot of things are being shot on low-end cameras, and that's okay. Authenticity matters. And I would rather have somebody out there being honest and truthful and telling a real story and documenting real things on a phone than not at all. However, when it comes to broadcast television, if you're really thinking about a serious media ministry, quality does matter. Research that I've seen and my experience tells me that people, if they've got a remote in their hand and they're watching you on television, they're going to give you less than 10 seconds to decide whether or not to watch your program. Give me a remote, man, I might give you less than 3 seconds. So in that world, you don't want quality to be a barrier between you and the audience. You don't want bad shots. You don't want bad video. You don't want poor lighting or poor editing. You don't want any of those things to be a block between you and the audience hearing your message. Don't cut that short. Always think quality matters, because people want to see a great program. No matter what they're watching, they want to see it. So it's not about authenticity. I think, you can do lower quality when you're doing short videos, when you're doing social media videos, things like that. Even your streaming doesn't have to be at the same level. But if you're really focusing on doing a broadcast TV show, I'd encourage you, think about quality. Quality really does matter. And before I go off, these are 10 commandments that I think really matter. But before I leave, let me tell you, quality isn't just equipment or techniques, it's people. Quality is people. This is not the time to get the high school kid who has a video camera on board to lead your television program. You need to get a staff or a team of people that really understand your vision, have the experience, know how to do this to really make it work. And also people when it comes to outsiders, whether it's outside vendors or coaches or consultants. I'll tell you, quality people matters. It really does matter. I encourage you to go see what it takes to get those kind of people involved in your media ministry, because it can go over the top. So all of this is really for people that feel God calling you to a broadcast media ministry. And again, there's still a real place for that out there. It takes money, it takes vision, it takes planning, it takes strategy. But if you can do it, I'm telling you, the numbers you reach are really staggering. You could have an amazing ministry trying to reach people with broadcast television. So those are the 10 commandments of starting a media ministry. I'd encourage you to check it out. And let me tell you, there's so much more about this very subject. You can search my blog at philcooke.com, PHILCOOKE. You search my blog for media ministry, communication, TV ministry, those kind of things, and you'll come up with a ton of posts that I've done over the years on how to staff it up, what kind of equipment to think about, how to really use the kind of techniques that you need to be thinking about to make that program work, and how you, as the leader or host, need to be thinking as you launch something like that. Remember, philcooke.com is the hub of everything we do, and I'd encourage you to come and check it out. I'm Phil Cooke. Check us out on this podcast. Subscribe. And by the way, please give us a rating. Go on there and hit the like button. Share it with friends. You know people that have thought about media ministry. Your pastor, other ministry leaders, nonprofit organizations that you know may have considered this. Send them a link. This could really dramatically make a difference for them. Thanks for watching.